one way. This is an interesting panel. This is a rock panel in Utah. And you can't make it out. Really neat stuff. We can't dim the lights in here, can we?
That's a chalice.
Oh yeah. Saw one of those in the pirate flags too. What's that?
It's like a KGC coloring book page.
This is very typical of the KGC. And again, this is one of the things that tells me maybe the LUE's not. The LUE is very clean and very concise. KGC panels are very, very chaotic. But they're packed with symbols. Again, masonry. We see a very nice compass or a square here. We see the menorah, a skull and crossbones. We see a heart, a diamond, a chalice. And these are all, again, Masonic. And there's probably a few more. There's a sun. Yeah, Jacob's ladder, absolutely. Very, very Masonic. Right there is our Jacob's ladder and another sun, a dagger. Again, we saw those in the pirate flags. Neat panel. This is actually in Utah. I'm very much convinced this is a KGC panel.
There's roses right below it, too, or a rose bush on another rock right below.
Yeah, this isn't the complete panel. It curves around and there's a star here. Very Masonic. So again, part of what we're seeing is the Masonic symbolism, but compared to the LUE, it's in a very appears haphazard. And I say appears because to somebody that knows what to read, there's probably a method to this. And then my final one is an actual map. This is a KGC map known as the Wolf map. Compare this to the LUE. Again, we see the presence of some geometry, but what we also see, again, random letters, dates. We got cursive here, but compared to this, there's probably some Roman numerals in here too. So again, we've got some very deliberate features and much more suggestions that this is a map than the LUE, which frankly, if Carl von Mueller hadn't said the LUE was a map, I can't imagine anybody would have ever picked that up and said, yep, it's a map. Which again is part of the mystery of it. So again, we've got a sort of a broad overview of how the KGC used Masonic symbolism and how that sort of looks in different formats. This is interesting because the idea is that all of the KGC treasures can be sort of found with this overlay. Do you guys remember earlier when I was talking about a grid that somebody made reference to with the LUE, with the computer? They said it revealed a grid. So the KGC very much used a grid like this. The trick was knowing how to place it and how to turn it in such a way that that once you visited these sites, because the grid could be used in different maps compared to what was being presented with the clues. But what would happen is that once you got the overlay placed correctly, then these sites become your treasure caches. Interestingly, we see this sort of, is this looking familiar from something else we saw earlier too? It looks kind of like those medicine wheels, right? This is a treasure site in Texas known as the Texas Spider Rocks. There's actually 3 of these rocks recovered in a large, probably 30-mile area in the turn of the century. 1907, in fact, was where at least one of those was found. But again, we see a rendition of the overlays here. We also see the presence of the numerals, some of the Roman numerals and some letters, and again, this sort of random haphazard feel. Again, same here, presumably by the same person that buried these. This is actually not the rock. This is a blueprint that was done on grease paper. The original is lost. This is the only one of the 3 that is still known. But there's some very specific Spanish markings on there too. It seemed like there was a Vera marker on some of these. There's a diamond, cross, arrow. So again, we're seeing this overlay in other areas. This is actually Roy Rausch I mentioned. He presented this as a LUE overlay. That some way you could place the LUE, and then at these intersections is where you're going to find your caches. So not only is the LUE multiple sites, but even within a single site, there are multiple cache points. each one of these would presumably have a pot or 2 or 3. And if you knew where your center was, or you knew how to center the overlay, then you could find it. So again, this is more evidence to suggest that the KGC may have had a hand in the LUE. And again, when you compare this to the medicine wheel that we saw way, way back earlier, and that obscure reference that Carl makes to it, it's like, wow. So, I'm at the end of my presentation. That came up fast. These are the things that are still sort of on the back of my mind. These are the things that as a researcher that I still am looking to answer. These are the things that sort of keep me pushing forward and trying to figure out what is the code. He mentions this as being the key to breaking the LUE. What is that and how does it relate to the map? Again, back to that verifiable references. Do some of those books and magazines and journals and things he mentioned, do they actually have them? And what do they say? What do they add to the story? How many LUE caches are or were there, and how many still remain? What are the true origins? Where did it come from? Because again, that may be important to understanding how to crack it. Carl von Euler made some offhanded remarks about this recovery, but as you may guess, he didn't spell it out. This is a question I would love to answer, and it's probably the one on this list that is the least likely to ever be answered. I think he took most of that information with him to his grave. How is the map coded and how can it be read? And does any material evidence remain? One thing I left out, and I don't know how I managed to do this, I told you earlier there was a suggestion that this was actually a Nazi treasure. I don't subscribe to that theory at all. That actually did not exist as a theory until 1995 when TreasureNet came out. And there was a gentleman by the name of Richard Walburn who fanatically presented that idea that there was a Nazi treasure that was associated with another treasure in the Four Corners region where some Mexican nationals supposedly hid tons and tons of gold. And so I think somewhere along the lines those stories got cross-pollinated. I don't think the LUE has anything to do with Nazis. I do think the LUE is out there. I do think that there's plenty to be recovered. I think if we can sort of surmise based on where they're at, a lot of the remaining caches are probably on government land or Indian reservations and probably won't ever be recovered. And then with that, I end my presentation, and I'm only a half hour ahead of schedule. I would love to answer any questions anybody had.
I have a question.
Wow. Please.
Enterrare.
Yes.
Actually, the Spanish pronunciation is enterrar, so that I might possibly be another clue.
Interesting. How so?
How so?
Like, how would the I impact?
Well, the I is not. I mean, for that to say,
It's like an extra letter?
It's an extra letter. It's not part of the enterrar, which is to bury.
And again, that bit of information comes secondhand. I would love to confirm that Carl actually said that. But thank you. That's an interesting piece of information. Anybody else?
Randy, I've heard mention that this was part of a math book. Have you ever been able to track that down?
I have not. I've actually what I've heard is it was part of a textbook for people learning how to draft. And so it was sort of an exercise how to come up with some of those arrangements or how to come up with some of the mathematics involved. I have not confirmed that. I've heard several people say that. There was actually a weird remark in one of the treasure magazines where somebody claimed that was also a design print for like curtains. And I thought, I can't imagine making curtains out of that. Yeah, it was some sort of a fabric pattern or some such thing. And I thought, yeah, I don't mind looking at it at work, but I don't think I'd want to look at it all day at home. But yeah, I have heard that it may be a drafted, but again, nobody's verified that. Anything else? I appreciate everybody that turned out. I've really enjoyed working on this. I'm really honored that Ancient Historical Research Foundation brought me out here and helped me present this to you. I hope it was interesting. Better than the Montezuma thing where half the people walked out because it was 2 hours long and they wanted to go to bed.
We appreciate Frank for that.
Yes.
And